Currently, my name is Susan Caolo, and I am at the home of Gregory DOSS. We are in Jonesboro, Georgia. Today's date is Sunday, July 10th, 2022. And we met at the United Military We Care Vet Fair, so this is another great event to help come across veterans. So first, before I even begin, Gregory, just thank you for letting me come to your home on a Sunday afternoon.
You're welcome, Sue.
That was always means a lot, and for kind of helping me with getting prepared for the interview. But this is it's a great honor to be here and get your story. So if you wouldn't mind beginning, could you first give your name, your full name, and spell it if you wouldn't mind, and then give the branch of service that you are in and your rank.
My name is Gregory DOSS, Gregory. Last name is DOSS, DOSS.
Where were you born?
Born in Honolulu, Hawaii. And our branch was the United States Air Force, separated with our rank honorably with Staff Sergeant E5.
Okay. When did you go in?
My time of service was from 2001 to 2007, June 01, June 07. On active duty. So I'm pre 9/11 and post 9/11 at the same time.
So 9/11 happened just shortly after you went in.
It was actually about a month after I graduated basic training, because I went from basic training from June of 2001 to August 2001. And then during that time frame, I was actually in my first tech school, electronics principles, over at Lackland Air Force Base. Going through that, and that's when 9/11 did occur. When I did see the videos of it during the newscastings, the initial thought of, at that point in time, I was at the lunch and dining facility on base near my dorms for tech school, was pretty much just let's go, just give me something, we can go.
When you heard that was going on, was it through TV or radio, or how did you know?
It was through TV. At that point in time, because I was, like I said, at a dining facility. It was a very surreal moment, and of course they repeated it the following day during tech school to explain it further, what was going on. And of course during that time frame, all the bases went to at least Force Protection Charlie, or Delta in this case, actually Delta, and then still at Charlie for about good 1 to 2 months after that, just in case that something did occur.
Is that a degree of readiness, or what?
That was a degree of protecting the bases and readiness as well at the same time. So when that did occur, that was how we prepared ourselves to know if we're going to have imminent attack or possible imminent attack on the bases, whether we're targets or not, so we could protect all military personnel on base for that. In relation to that, previously, right as I was about ready to graduate basic training, in I believe July of 2001, right before I graduated, I got done doing my field training exercises, came back, and apparently there was an insider attack on base. There was a package bomb that was sent to former first sergeant of the EOD training squadron, explosive ordnance disposal training squadron for the Air Force, and I think most of the military on Lackland Air Force Base, and she ended up opening it and losing her arm. And because of that, we were on lockdown and force protection, or Bravo Charlie, during that time frame, and all of us, at least during that, were out the latter half of our training, were required to protect our squadrons and guards.
How long was that after the?
That was about a couple weeks. We did that with security forces being everywhere on base and having entry and exit points for that.
Was your training prepared you for that, or?
The bare bones training, at least to understand how to do security for the squadron, yes, but altogether, no, it wasn't something that you were expected and prepared for, really. I mean, no one really is for all that in general, but especially during basic training, you're coming off of field training exercises, not a real scenario.
how long did it take for them to figure out what was
It took them
behind the
about a
motive?
couple days, at least, I know for sure. They didn't give any more detail other than that, and we were guarding squadron on 8-hour shifts for 8 to 12-hour shifts for about a week before our graduation ceremony.
Wow. So at the time, they didn't know if that was a targeted, or, I mean, if it was, what was the motive for, that it could have been at other bases, or was it
Yeah, they weren't sure what the
one-off?
motive was at that point in
Wow.
time, but they found out it was a flunked out former EOD airman that ended up doing it because they had some issues, because I guess it had some trouble or whatever, or got in trouble with the command leadership, and that's why they were flunked out from that school.
Wow. So that, I mean, like about as situations that you were conditioned between 9/11 and that,
Yeah.
put you in high alert. That's how you
Exactly.
started.
Yeah, exactly. It was kind of weird in a way, just thinking back now. I really hadn't thought about it in a deep thought basis really ever until like that, just like one day when I ended up passing that first sergeant and saw there was no portion of the lower arm available in her right arm anymore, courtesy of that bomb. And that was further confirmed when I actually saw later during my career in the Air Force, the Air Force Times, the picture of that first sergeant, and it verified, because when I saw her on Lackland is when I was out processing to come to Fort Gordon here in Augusta, Georgia, to do my second schooling for satellite or wideband and telemetry systems apprentice school.
Wow. She stayed in.
Yeah, as far as I know, she stayed in. As far as I know, she retired. I have no idea as far as the rest,
wow.
the full story on that. But like I said, they did do an article on that. No, it's publicly available. I looked through some archives for Air Force Times and looked into it.
Wow. That's, yeah. I mean, it hit the news, but nobody, never know any of the details, and certainly not anybody that was.
It might have been
not
a local
anybody that was
thing,
there.
but that, as far as military, it was within the Air Force Times for sure. But locally, it might have been only within maybe, for instance, San Antonio area for what occurred.
Wow. So what was going on from there with your?
So from there, just finished off my first. There were 2 tech schools altogether for my career field of satellite wideband telemetry systems back in the AFSC, Air Force Specialty Code, was 2E1, X1. In my case, it was going to be for my apprentice school, so 3-level. For our job, we had to go through 12 blocks of training, which took about 3 months over at Lackland Air Force Base. And the remaining was from November of 2001 to April of 2002. We had a month delay courtesy of some snow days because Georgia just doesn't like snow. So there's pretty much only like one snowplow per county, so we had about a month delay courtesy of some snow in November and January. But that was altogether about 4 or 5 months training for apprentice school for that, for SATCOM wideband telemetry. And then from there we actually went to our true bases. And in my case, I got assigned to Camp Humphreys, South Korea, which was the 607 Combat Communications Squadron, which is no longer in existence. It's been absorbed and more of a legacy squadron. That's now still at Osan Air Base, or redesignated down to certain other places down at Guam, at Anderson Air Force Base. And yeah, so we did, where our main mission was tactical communications throughout the entire peninsula for the 7th Air Force. We were in what they call a GSU, Geographically Separated Unit, out of Osan Air Base. So all of our command and control is out of there, out of the 7th Air Force up there. We were tasked with, in case something does occur again back on the peninsula for Korea, the Korean War starts off again because it's technically in its armistice at that point in time. That we would be the main go-to squadron for supplying communications for the military, especially the Air Force, and also main critical stuff for long-haul communications. So in my case, I was assigned to the SATCOM shop, satellite communication shop. When I first got there, I was assigned to the 94 Alpha, which was a small node terminal. A lot of times during the exercises at that point in time, before we got the bigger terminal assigned to our team, we were tasked to go down to Daegu a lot during exercises.
To where?
To Tegu.
Uh-huh.
Tegu a lot, down to exercise down there. So I went down there at least a couple times. Then when we got assigned the new terminal, the 100 Alpha, which is a hub terminal for long range or long haul satellite communications ability, that changed us to mostly going to also an air base over at the golf course area primarily, and then one time over to Gwangju during one of the other exercises in December. And there ain't joking when it comes to Korea, it does get cold, it does get nasty.
Yeah.
So trying to actually drive with the old Vietnam era, do their 2.5 ton vehicle or trucks, trying to pull a 20-foot, what they call a quick reaction satellite antenna QRSA on a trailer, and also the communications van was interesting trying to drive, especially when the local nationals don't have any regard for bigger vehicles, whether they're smaller or not.
That's what I was going to ask you. What was? Can you describe what was a day like? I mean, what was a?
So a day like, as far as like.
Where are you on? Are you on the base, the U.S. with U.S.
On
airmen,
U.S.
pilots,
airmen,
and
U.S. In our case, we were on an Army base, Army garrison, which is now very huge in the main headquarters for the U.S. Army over there for 8th Army. But back in the day, or back when I was over there, and for a while until recently, I think 2008 is when they changed, or 2018, excuse me. But when I was there, Yongsan up in Seoul was the main 8th Army headquarters for that area. But in our case, we were the main, biggest Air Force unit on the Army base. The second after that was the weather guys, and then tactical air control party that used to run with the Army, primarily the Special Forces guys over there on the base. But day to day, we were in charge of making sure our equipment works, getting the mass phone calls during exercises, preps, inspections, so on and so forth. Making sure we were ready to go because we were the main go-to unit besides our counterparts that were up at Camp Red Cloud for that kind of stuff. But we were the main ones that deployed out. So we had to go through what Air Force Mobility School locally. So we had our own team of airmen that would be our opposing forces, dressed differently, act like some local nationals would do. It was like North Koreans coming in and other contingent forces as far as that side of the house goes.
So they were training exercises,
They were training
trying
exercises.
to simulate.
Yes.
Okay.
So we had to get prepared for mobility school, know how to pack out, know how to do combat stuff, know how to use our weapons. Each of us were all assigned our own, as a matter of fact, M16A1s, which are Vietnam era weapons for rifles. We had to qualify at least once a year with those, at least over there. So there was that. Local national wise, we had our base, and then slowly, shortly off of the base gates, we had local village for us. At that point in time, for instance, our watering holes, our bars, we did not associate with the Army because usually the Army used to create a lot of problems with us.
Why?
So
Why
it's
is that?
just an inter-service rivalry, for one. Because, for instance, the one thing we did as far as squadron or intramural sports teams, we had intramural softball and flag football team. We ended up representing the whole 8th Army as far as our squadron teams for the Army instead of being an Air Force team. Some people did not agree with that on the Army side, so they decided to ransack our dorms and get in a couple fights with our airmen on our transport bus on the base. That used to get us to our dorms, to our squadron. On base, we had consolidated dorms, which meant that we had everybody from E5, E6, and below in the same dorms. We would usually have roommates as far as that goes. Each floor had different assignments for different ranks usually. And then they built a brand new dorms, which I guess according to them, to some of the people to this day have been either tore down or reutilized on base.
So you lived in the barracks,
I lived on
and
the
you were
barracks.
separated from
I was separated
the
as
Army?
at that point in time I was separated because, as I digress, going back, 2001 is when I got married. That's my wife that I've been with so far for 21 years, luckily.
Congratulations.
She's a Marine Corps brat, so she kind of understands some of it, but she's been with me for 21 years, longer than that as far as we were basically high school sweethearts, so there's that.
So she was
But-
with you in Korea?
She was separated
Oh,
at the
okay.
time. I was a remote, and I took it as a remote. There were some other things at Nellis Air Force Base at the time where she, because we went back to Vegas area, is where I entered the military from, and signed up. And she went back there and stayed over there. But it was a remote tour, and I just tried to keep it that way so I could actually get a follow on to where I wanted to be. But yeah, it was a separation type deal. There were some that, luckily, as far as some other members of the squadron were, dual military, so they lucked out in that matter. But they also tried to push our wife and also first sergeant over at Nellis Air Force Base for the family side of the house. Try to see if they wanted to have brother. I was like, I'll be honest, I didn't. I just wanted to get the remote tour done. That way it's on the record, so I can continue on to where we wanted to be. As far as assignments goes too.
Was that tough for you being away?
It was tough. I won't lie, when I first found out, because I was mad, shall we say, because I just started out this brand new marriage as far as that level of our relationship goes, because I was still stationed and still in tech school at the time. I got married during Christmas Exodus break in January or December of 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So, but once I found out that assignment, everybody else but me that I knew of got assigned straight from tech school. There's a couple other guys that came after, but was assigned to Korea directly, and there was some kind of within the squadron as far as leadership goes, first line supervisors and that, they were kind of, for brand new airmen, they really didn't want that to happen for this kind of squadron.
Mm-hmm.
More so because of the experience that's kind of needed to go into that. But it did put me in a good experience and learning curves and so on and so forth for the type of squadron I was in, because it was a tactical, it was strategic communications.
Had you chosen that specialty?
I did choose that specialty myself. When I took the ASVAB in high school, I took it twice. I still scored high enough on the first time, and then the second time I was one of the top 10 in the state of Nevada. Myself, my wife, and a few other friends, and so on and so forth, had taken ASVAB. I actually stole my wife away from the Navy because she's supposed to go to the Navy as a code person. She scored 100% on that.
But she didn't go in?
But no, she didn't go in. It was my doing. I'll blame myself on that one, but she agreed. She decided not to do it. The same recruiters I had in Vegas that were in charge of the little town called Toronto, Nevada, tried to convince her to cross over, but she was looking at it for a while, but she decided against it just to make life simpler in a way, and that's how that occurred. So. But yeah, I chose my own. The careers I had to choose from based on my background scoring so high in electronics and mechanical for my aptitudes was either working on the F-15 black boxes, which to me felt like morbid because I knew what happens after when you have to find the black boxes for aircraft. Or that career field, and I also tried out for air traffic control. I qualified at that point in time when I did. They didn't have any slots available, so that's how I chose that, because I figured, I was doing stuff, and as a kid, being a young, brand new, 18-year-old, I was like, oh, SATCOM, so I could sit there and fly the satellites, and that wasn't fully the truth.
That's what you thought.
That's what I thought at the time.
So you're still in Korea doing the tactile.
Mm-hmm.
How long were you there doing that?
From Korea, I was assigned there from May of 2002 to May of 2003. During that time frame, also too, so the last major exercise I was at for military exercise, I was deployed out of our area down at Camp Humphreys up to Osan Air Base with our crew. We got extended for a week, and I was trying to figure out why, but apparently that's when Operation Rapid Freedom kicked off in March 2003.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's just my assumption, but due to the reason of that kicking off, starting, is the reason why we got extended out, so we could actually have all the communications available, resources available for what they needed to do.
So from Korea, that's interesting that would...
That wasn't be the first time either. Talking to some other members, as a matter of fact, one of them actually I ran to here from what used to be the 619th Air Control Squadron, and then turned into the 607 Combat Communications Squadron. He actually lives here. He's a retired tech sergeant, and part of our, as a matter of fact, part of the member of my VFW post that I belong to, ironically enough. But they deployed actually to Kuwait and stuff, and out to the field for Desert Storm back in the start of that as well. So it's nothing brand new for us, for our capabilities that we had at that time.
So, yeah, I guess, so Korea, I mean, even though you're stationed pretty far away, there's still...
Yeah, and during the start of the whole 9/11 attacks too, apparently they still had like 1 or 2 comm vans still deployed when I first showed up out in the field to support that operation.
Wow.
And then back to the day-to-day life. So apparently previously there was no such thing as a curfew off base, but after 9/11 kicked off, there was a curfew at 1 p.m. or 1 in the morning, usually on the weekends, 12 in the morning, usually on the weekdays. At Humphreys, they had one bus at the end of the night, and if you didn't get on that, you'd have to go walk and take what we call a walk of shame, which is about a 2-mile hike back to the dorms.
Did you interact a lot with the locals in Korea?
Yeah, which, as far as the whole, like our own bars type of deal, a lot of the bartenders became our friends and major, person squadron. As a matter of fact, one was a member, is married to one of our former squadron members. This now Chief Master Sergeant is stationed in Korea right now. We went back there. That was on air base. So there is that. And because of those relations and stuff like that, that helped us kind of learn some local stuff. We had opportunities on base to do so, but in my case, I probably didn't take it as much as I should have. And since, for instance, I'll get to that too, but martial arts background wise, I could have took, learned local martial arts as far as I take Taekwondo and various other things, other Korean arts, but being deployed every 2 or 3 months out in the field for exercise didn't, at least in my brain, make sense because I couldn't really commit the time needed.
So was that something you'd already done before you entered the service?
So what I did before the service, yeah, I started with Filipino martial arts of Kung Tao, and which is basically like Filipino Karate Do, but more of a circular fluid motion movement. And also with the same person, he also taught what they Arnis Polite was what we transitioned into for what he was teaching at one point in time, and that's a family art that combines judo, boxing, and Arnis into one art. So our movements were in the X shape for boxing, and then our hands, stuff like that, for the movements of Arnis, and throws of judo for protection and where we move things around. But the person I was learning from at that point in time was actually a retired Chief Warrant Officer for the Navy.
I wondered if there was any influence of military there, or was it just...
Yeah, so there is that influence there. The other influences that I have pretty much along the lineage of military in my family. So for instance, for myself, I have myself, my father, all my uncles on my mom's side, one of my uncles on my dad's side, my own uncle on my dad's side, and then most of my great uncles and aunts, maternal great or step grandfather. My grandfather was World War II for Navy. Did both the European and Pacific theaters, but primarily mostly in Pacific. I go back to World War I for my paternal grandfather, step grandfather, or paternal, but via my grandmother's side of the house, where he was apparently a cook for the Army Air Corps back in the day. Which is, of course, now the precursor for what being a separate branch of the U.S. Air Force. And then prior to that, Civil War, probably War of 1812, maybe Revolutionary War.
Wow, your family goes back that far.
Yeah, and then I think also French-Indian War for the United States, at least, for the American military, any kind of conflicts of that nature. And if I look further back in the family, which I traced out myself, of course, based off my last name, which comes from lineage of knights from the border region of Germany and out of Germany near Denmark, for back in that day. And then in my case, I'm also mixed blood, so I have Japanese in me. So my family has had samurai lineage as well. So a long line of serving, militarily wise.
And I also think, and remember in your paper where you mentioned in all Japanese engineering.
Yeah. So unfortunately, it's one of those where kind of regretted times in my lives that I didn't know about until my great aunt let me know. But unfortunately, my great uncle, one of them, was part of an all Japanese American engineering squadron that was dedicated during World War II, just to that support, out of Hawaii originally, and then some other members, of course, in the United States. But he was a World War II four star for the Army, and he served in that squadron that I found out later on. But I didn't know about that until, unfortunately, his son Tommy passing courtesy of a distracted driver in Hawaii.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So that was back in 2004, I believe. So.
Wow. But you have a distinguished, just on both sides, way back military, and did you say samurai?
Samurai, yeah.
Samurai?
So, like, for instance, going back to my dad too, so Vietnam War, he was Force Recon, Marine Corps, so he was more of a Special Forces side, but now has become U.S. You still have Force Recon, but it's now become the Marine Raiders, Special Operations stuff. So there's that. And he himself actually got blown out of Foxhole back in the day, I think somewhere near the border of Laos and Vietnam somewhere. He didn't say, but he was stationed in Chulai from 66 to 68 technically, but probably his tour of duty is probably from 66 probably to 67 roughly in time frame, but he got taken out of the courtesy of injuries. And he ended up getting recovery over in Okinawa, and then his last time frame for his stuff was over at Camp Pendleton working with old stables, the old dude ranch they used to have on base for all the families.
Oh, wow.
And he had no experience doing that whatsoever, but he ended up getting assigned to that courtesy of him trying to recover before getting separated.
Just before we go on back to your career growing up, were you aware, did you talk a lot with your dad about his military? Was that something when you were younger, or did you become more aware since you've been in?
I did to a certain point, and of course, being a Vietnam vet, they don't want to open up very much, and even for that matter, just being a vet to vet within your own family, they don't want to open up very much. While I was in, it did help a little bit as far as learning things, but of course, he hasn't told me certain things now. I think my wife knows certain things more than I do, because he'd rather tell her instead of me, which is fine. I understand why. But that's part of the reason why, eventually down the road when I was stationed at Hickam Air Force Base, I lucked out and there's a special duty TDY, temporary duty assignment to do personnel recovery over in Vietnam for missing in action POW, KIA type deal with joint, at that point in time, Joint POW MIA command. Now was with JPAC was the moniker. Now it's DPA, Defense POW MIA command, or county command, or county agency.
So you want to cover that now? I mean, what year did you go do that? Because that's really interesting, the joint.
So
explain that for someone who hasn't.
So in 2006 is when I went, started getting trained up in December of 2005. Got sent out with our team. Luckily, my original team I was supposed to be with got their mission canceled. It was in the same area though, but due to the common personnel that's supposed to be augmenting from the Navy, shall we say, lack of terms, not learning their stuff they were supposed to learn, they kicked that person out, sent her back to her unit with the Navy, and then put me in that slot instead. So I got selected for that mission. We went back over to what they call the Highlands of Vietnam. We went from Hickam Air Force Base on a military contracted charter commercial aircraft, stopped over at Marshall Islands for a minute and fueled up, and then went over to Guam, fueled up there. Eventually ended up in Da Nang over in Vietnam. Stayed there for about a week as they were building up the campsite and quarters up there on where we were going to. We stayed at what they call, it was a nice government resort, paid for. It was on China Beach, what used the original landing beach for what the Marines landed on. If you look out at what now is the airport in Da Nang, it used to be the air base back in the Vietnam War. there's a bunch of burned out closet huts still from the attacks and stuff like that from your aircraft shelters over there that are still just in existence, just sitting there and intact. There's nothing gone.
Are they considered historic? Are they protected or just?
No idea on that.
Wow.
That's up to the Vietnamese government on that one, as well as locality government. But then, about a week after being at the 5-star resort on China Beach, 5-star 5 Diamond, we ended up sitting in the jungle for about 30 days, over in Cam Duc in the Vietnam Highlands in Quang Nam province. Cam Duc, back in the day for the Vietnam War, was a air base in the middle, a special operations air base, and it had 4 observation posts for artillery support, anti-air defense. In my case, we were deployed to what they call OP1, Observation Post 1, to recover 3 personnel, some kind of effects and proof that they were there, to hopefully repatriate and close that chapter for their families. And that particular area was in charge of overwatch of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The site that we were at, we were about 3 mountaintops away from being inside of Laos itself. So I was charged of that. During the Tet Offensive, you had that base overran. All the observation posts were overran. Going up there at the site initially, we had it set up. We had anthropologists with us, various other personnel, EOD, of course, communications guys, mortuary affairs, our leadership teams, our officers, our officer and our team sergeant, of that nature. Most of us, ironically enough, we also had our medics, and also we had one photographer with us as well. So, ironically enough, and also our linguists too, most of us, ironically enough, were actually Air Force on the team, with a few Marine Corps and Army intermingled in between, either between the leadership or EOD, mortuary affairs stuff. So they would sit there, and there's a joint effort, usually, but primarily the United States is the only one that I know of that I've been trained or taught or told that on a regular basis still actually looks for their POW, MIA, KIA personnel during their conflicts, and still try to recover them from the areas of conflict.
So the team, so where you were based there, is that do people report there as on a rotation basis, and is there a basic forensic team all the time there, or? There's
known sites based off of history of what may get reported by, for instance, the local villagers or local governments, and based off of that, it may take 2-3 years just to get to that one site because of all the diplomatic agreements and talks that have to go through that got to be done before that. They send an investigation team out first before sending a recovery team out to verify if that site is true or not, and if there is something worthy looking into. In this case, this site that we were at, OP1, obviously was affected during linebacker 1 and 2 because you guys see 25-foot bomb craters still in the ground. But they sent us out. We were like the 2nd or 3rd team out there on that same site. We went in for 3. The story was the last known people that were up there during the Tet Offensive was the officer in charge of the site was a major, and then the radio guy or the person that was operating the machine gun at that point in time. So we went up there. We were at a dry screen. There's 2 different screen sites when it comes to that. In this case, it was a dry screen site, shaker screen. Go up there, take that, and set up screens. And usually we'd hire most local villagers to assist us with the effort project. We have a contingent team of the American side. All of us were in civilian clothes because it's more mainly a humanitarian mission. We would get allotments for that as well, to get civilian clothes for the mission to go on. Get our rations because out in the jungle we didn't get everything we needed.
That was the other thing I was going to ask. Again, what a day or a couple days do you hike out?
We would get dropped in for the site via helicopter,
Okay.
commercial aircraft. In this case, it was an Mi-8 helicopter from Da Nang, fly from there, and then get dropped out in the jungle on the observation landing site they're on
So
the
how
road.
dense was the terrain?
They cleared it out, but it was very dense otherwise, terrain-wise. In my case, that was like the first time ever seeing any kind of, the fireflies, lightning bugs, and it was very bright at night, so it freaked me out. Freaked me out at night. Being out in the middle of the jungle, knowing that there's some of the stuff on there based on other stories of my father, for certain critters and various other things being out there, they're not nice and very, very deadly. Because while I was there, we actually got a chance to go down to the village from the mountaintop. That was a very arduous hike up and down. But walking past one of the trees, it had a bamboo viper about eye level, just climbing through the little bush. Bright green, knew not to touch it, just stepped about 10 feet the other way along the path just to avoid that area so we didn't upset it. And then also too, during one of the days we were doing our work, doing the screening site, because me being the convoy, I had to sit there and do some communication stuff to verify certain equipment was working in the morning, and make sure things are operating, and do some stuff at night, send back evidence via the photographer had, because we had the data over radio capability.
The what, Rick?
Data over radio.
Oh, okay.
Data over radio capability. So we were able to, use basic internet type stuff, send bare bones, emails back to our families, and also data back to the Detachment 2 headquarters up in Hawaii, as well as back to main headquarters at Hickam Air Force Base for JPAC. And that way they have that as a case file for building. So we would do that during the day, but if I wasn't doing anything of that nature, usually I was mostly on the screening line, helping trying to screen out, trying to find remains and effects for the person we're trying to recover for. Usually Vietnam has a very high acidic soil, so as far as any remaining intact remains, or even just equipment, it's very rusted, worn out, or you only find bare bones, literally bare bones or teeth, and that's all you can find usually. One of the villagers actually brought us a human femur, if I remember correctly. That was slightly broke, a little bit sharp, but that was probably for someone else's remains, as I think out of the air base area in the valley is where it came from. Because the villagers would come off from the valley every day in their village, their town, and go to work for us, and then they would go back down every day. We also had a Vietnamese government and military contingent with us as well. The team would swap off every other night usually to have dinner with them, so we actually can swap stories, learn history of that nature, and also keep diplomatic relations going that way.
Did you learn also what happens when they do find remains?
So
did you get any stories about that?
So stories wise, as far as the training before they get to that story, so the Central Identification Lab at Hickam Air Force Base, which is still going on, it's one of the top ones in the world to do this kind of forensic stuff. They utilize mitochondrial DNA, which mitochondrial DNA comes from the mother side usually of someone, human remains at least. And based off of that, mitochondrial DNA is a constant, so you can always find that. And the DNA analysis is compared to that mitochondrial DNA from the family. The family usually gives samples of DNA, whether it be by a cotton swab, from spit, or various other things, and they have it analyzed so they can compare it. If they find remains, and that verifies it. I mean, at the end of the day, it may only be a couple bones, but at least there's that closure. But later on down the road, after I was out, I followed back up with DPA, JPAC headquarters, and just asked, hey, I was on this team, what did we find? We lucked out, we found 3, or they found enough evidence to verify that all 3 that we were looking for, we found. We found the major stuff we identified the major, I think the machine gunner, and also I think the radio person, comm person. So for that, we found them, at least enough evidence to verify, yeah, we can close these cases out and
when they
closer to the family.
When they close out, then the family, do they actually have an actual
have
honor of military funeral or service?
Usually they do. It's up to the family too as well. They get notified DPA also, or DPA, as far as me following them currently, they also have individual like briefings in certain areas, depending on the type of, whether it be on the Vietnam War or just in generic in general for all the families that are interested or those that are interested in the recovery missions for that. So.
So you enjoyed that? I mean, it was interesting work.
It was interesting. It was also lack of terms homage because I was Vietnam vet, and because of that, going back to my influences, that kind of opened him up for certain things, for his time to explain and talk to me, and that put more of a deeper understanding between us, because his PTSD really wasn't diagnosed until I started digging deeper on my own time after I got out of the military, and that helped him get his benefits as well. So.
That's good. That's good. I mean, well, also the fact just for the son to be in the same terrain and kind of get a night, because I know it's hard for people to imagine the conditions.
It was surreal, to very surreal, considering that you yourself know the history firsthand and also secondhand from being in the military and having those lessons. But it's very surreal.
Yeah, I'm sure there was just sort of a lot of unspoken communication between you and your father. I mean, just the fact that you were physically there.
Yeah.
I don't know. I assume he had never been back.
No, and he doesn't want to.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I'm assuming he has been to that area, based as far as in general that Highlands or whatever. Considering he was in July and part of Force Recon, which is Special Force for the Marine Corps at that point in time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So you got a taste of what it was like at night and. Yeah, that's gotta be probably more than you even realize as far as a connection for him. I mean, so how long and what was the total amount of time you were there?
In my case, since I was an augmentee for the team, I was there for a month. So from February to March of 2006. And then some of the teams stayed after. That was a part of the regular JPAC assigned crew for their normal day-to-day squadron or military assignments. They stayed on for an extra month. And then going back to what we also found we found the old, like a high school pendant. That it's like the old keys or whatever it was like. That had a symbol on it. Of course, we knew it was American. Took pictures of that, sent that back, and that helped some identification. They told me that after I left, talked to them when I got back to base, and they got back, they found some stuff of old wallet leather and stuff of that nature where the water buffalo should have been. What the water buffalo means is big giant water tank to allow fresh water and cooking and stuff like that. So.
Was the entire team, you mentioned the anthropologist, was that a military? Was that within the military or was that a civilian?
It was a civilian that worked for military.
Okay.
So in my case, we had the anthropologist we had has been out there like one or two other times, and he's also one of the major ones as far as JPAC goes at that point in time at the headquarters. So.
Is that something an airman now could, if they were interested, could they volunteer to work with JPAC? Or is not like that?
They could if they wanted to. I don't know how the hiring processes are for that, whether it be an internship or a regular.
I just thought while you were on it, I'm just if somebody was listening to this, that it might sound like something be very gratifying to be involved with that, looking for to identify.
Yeah, there is something of that nature. They can do that, or I know currently now there's a lot of partnerships more so to help probably speed up the process or make things a little bit easier for identification of different nonprofit organizations and historical groups out there that do that similar stuff right now between whether it be Europe, Asia, various other locations. So.
Okay. Well, I just asked because your role with the U.S. Air Force is specialized even with the technology that you work with. It's just a different area, so it's interesting, for somebody to know another role.
In my case, being comm, I lucked out being communications because everybody needs comm, and we in military communications are actually kind of at the end of the day really all services work together. Within the military communications community, there's 3 special communications assignments primarily, actually technically 4 or 5. Joint wise, you have DPA now, which used to be JPAC. Primarily radio guys used to go to that for their assignments. and you usually have to be E4 and above back in the day. I don't know if it's the same now. It was the same for selection process though for augmentation. They would usually send it out to the Pacific Rim units between all the service branches and say, hey, we need these guys, can select it, and then you get selected by your headquarters for your type of Air Force. So in my case, it was PACAF, Pacific Air Forces. That assignment was sent down to squadron. I was selected to go out. So, but otherwise, yeah, there's JPAC, White House Communications Agency, which you support, of course, presidential support and stuff of that nature, DC. Then you have what they call JCU and JCSC, Joint Communications Unit, which is based out of Fort Bragg, so you support a lot of the special operations stuff. JCSC, Joint Communications Special Element, that's based out of MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa. I don't know if they're still in existence as far as the way they run, but as far as I understand, it still is. But they do a lot of special operations stuff too as well, to support those elements. So they can get qualified not only, if you want to do Ranger School, you can do Ranger School through the Air Force by doing that.
That's just a whole lot of different areas you can go into. There's not, people just think of pilots.
Yeah, no, there's not just pilots for the military, or especially the Air Force. I mean, there is that contingent because we are the Air Force, but we still have to have everything else to support that capability that we, at the end of the day, is what the Air Force is supposed to be known for. So you have to have everybody from, communications, supply, food service, morale, ammunition, so on and so forth.
So where'd you go from there?
So from Hickam Air Force Base, my last assignment was with Air Force Special Operations Command. This brand new reactivated unit, heraldry-wise. It was over at Nellis Air Force Base, 3rd Special Operations Squadron.
What year was this?
This was in 2006 to 2007, before I separated.
Okay.
Honorably. So that unit's heraldry is actually dates back to the Army Air Corps days in World War I. 3rd Special Operations Squadron was primarily a aerial photography intelligence unit. And then during Vietnam era, one of the few enlisted Medal of Honor recipients for the Air Force Medal of Honor as part of the squadron's heritage, Sergeant John Levito. Back in Vietnam, they were flying the AC-47 Spooky aircraft, which was an attack cargo aircraft, specialized just for long range overwatch for special operations stuff. During that time for Levito, he was in flight with his crew. Apparently the aircraft got hit and a lot of things. He himself got injured as well, and shrapnel. One of the major flares for lighting up the sky at night got lit, and he threw out the back of the aircraft. And no less than like a few minutes later, seconds later, that exploded. Luckily, that saved the rest of him and his crew, so the aircraft can land back down on the ground. So that's part of our heraldry for that. That is well known and well pushed. If we can do this, this is what we can do. The mission now is currently doing armed intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance with back when I was in, with the MQ-1 Predator, RPA, remote pilot aircraft, are also known as UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle. And doing that for special operations, we were pretty much the lead. We were the only squadron at that point in time that was designated to do overwatch for special operations for that air platform, and that was remotely done. We had 4 operations units in the theater for Afghanistan, Iraq, and a few other places that would help launch the aircraft. But at the end of the day, everything as far as the major support mission was ran remotely via satellite link.
Where were you physically located?
Physically located wise, we were at Nellis Air Force Base, at the site where we do that at. And then as far as we were the only ones for special operations, conventional wise, we had support directly out of what is now Creech, but Union Springs Air Force, or Creech Air Force Base now. And it turned that way when I was still in, but now it's Indian Springs. It was Indian Springs Auxiliary Airfield when I was first starting out in my career. And there was a sole designated Predator unit that was up there.
Where's that exactly?
In Nevada.
In Nevada,
well.
okay.
So it was about maybe 50 miles north of Vegas and about 30 miles north of North Las Vegas in Nevada. So there's that. But for our unit, like I said, we were doing remote support and observation and operations for supporting ground elements for special operations for Joint JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command, and U.S. SOCOM, United States Special Operations Command. So we were very well highlighted on that as well.
That was new. I mean,
That was new technology.
Right.
It was needed considering the type of operations we had to do for high value targets and stuff of that nature. One that I can actually sit there and say now for high value target wise is that in the Air Force Times, if you look it up, there is an article that states that this squadron, the 3rd SOS that I was part of, took out a high value target by the name of Caolo in Iraq. And originally the story was that it was the F-16s that took him out, but apparently there was a couple extra ammunition beforehand, and the F-16s just kind of finished it off for us. So.
Did you have to go through special training? How were you keeping up on the? Sounds like it would have been almost like.
So once you actually get assigned to like a Special Operations Command for the Air Force, you really don't pick it. You just get assigned to it depending on how they go, especially depending on what base you're going to. But you have to go through what they call Introduction to Special Operations at that point in time through Joint Special Operations University. And in my case, they were having a class over at Amphibious Base Coronado, which is where they train the SEALs at their school. But they go through the history, how certain operations went, bring in special speakers within the community to explain things further and help you understand things further. And that's just at a basic classroom level type deal. And that was a lot of week long over at San Diego area in my case. And a few others that just came to the squadron.
With the Predator, for example, because that was new. I mean, that's new technology being put to use.
It's actually not new. It was actually a Navy program back in the 90s. It's been used since Kosovo. As a matter of fact, I think one was shot down there in Kosovo.
So were you familiar with it before you got that assignment?
I was familiar because of the comm side of the house. We have to understand how to SATCOM. In my case, satellite communications. And so a couple of guys I was with during that tech school actually got assigned over to Indian Springs to do that support and work that aircraft platform and the communication side of the house. So that's how I got aware of it. And during that time, it was a high, and it still is a high demand support platform to get instantaneous live intelligence and also if need be live fire support for ground elements.
How many people are involved in the flying of controlling one Predator?
So controlling one Predator, generally it's, if you include the launch and recovery elements and also the ones actually doing the operations back remotely, there's usually one sensor operator and one pilot per section. So you have one sensor operator, one pilot at the forward hood, and then the same on the far, so 4 at least for that. Plus your support staff and your intelligence staff.
Did you, and excuse me if this isn't sounds like a dumb question, I guess, but you were doing communications, and do you have to understand the flying of it? Or, I mean, are you managing just the communications that's going on between?
You have to understand the little bits of,
seems like a lot of pieces going on at one time.
There's a little bit of heads-up display, for instance, like that. You have to understand how to utilize and how things work in relation to what you got to do, because you have to sit there and take some of the data and download that later on for. So
there's definitely strategic teamwork involved.
There's a lot of strategic teamwork. There's a lot of instantaneous teamwork.
Okay.
Like for instance, if I have to sit there and go in and upload the cryptographic information that goes on the radios that they communicate for that stuff, and go from there. Otherwise, they won't be able to talk securely.
That was kind of my point. If there had to be a kind of a circular.
Yeah, there has to be, because like on the back end, like I have to understand if there's something going wrong with the long haul link Because the Predator is designed to, in case it does lose communication, to go into autonomy, to where if after a while, if it doesn't have a certain link, it goes back to base. But for that, yeah, you have to understand how it flies as far as that element goes of it, how the communications package works on board the flight platform,
Okay.
which is a satellite link. And then on the back end of it, back of the main element, you have to understand how the launch and recovery works via a certain SATCOM band link for the military, and then also how the long range haul interaction works so that it can actually command and control and get what they need done with the aircraft, the air platform.
Well, there's a lot going on, but that helps me kind of understand that that it's not in isolation, that you're not just doing, you're not in one part doing comms and
Yeah, for the most part, I mean, you just sit back and let things go the way they are until the next mission comes up for the like shift change, at least for the communications element side of the house. Most of the stuff was done as far as maintenance by contract staff, but that worked for the military, so they were allowed to be there. But we were, as far as the main communications side of the house for the military, we had to do certain things for that platform, as well as try to be in contract oversight, because we also had to get trained for that too, for the military, over the contract staff that would do most of the maintenance on the platforms we needed. So back at the remote element, the action control module, or control van, comm van, was actually considered aircraft, which really wasn't, but because of what it was doing, that's why it was part of that, as far as the way it was coded.
yeah, those are just a little bit that I know. You know, wasn't aware of the altitude and speeds that those things can operate.
Yeah, they can pretty much operate, depending on the cruise, pretty much about 24 hours. No problem with the unblinking.
Wow.
They're usually about mid to almost high altitude.
About how long were you working in that area?
In my case, it was actually technically a 4-year assignment, but things changed for me, at least, for the Air Force ideal. So I did that for about a year. I actually beat my own boss there, and my own non-commissioned officer in charge of NCOIC. So I was actually the NCOIC for a while with the comm element to get that up and going. And so that was part of that. That's like, in our case, this was a reactivated squadron. There's a certain amount of challenge points in the military. In our case, for that squadron, I was actually one cadre, is what they call it. So one subject matter experts to help bring that squadron where it is now. Because currently, right now, they're flying the MQ-9 Predator, or Reaper, Predator B, was what they called back then. We were still in the planning stages trying to figure out the Predator B for ourselves too. When I was still in, well, they're flying out of Cannon Air Force Base primarily right now.
Do you keep up with it? I mean, do you follow a little
A
bit?
little bit, just to see where things are going. Just for somewhat of nostalgia and just to see how things are going in general. Because in my case, I'm a very big tech person. Of course, doing the job I do now, I still do communications to this day, of some sort, telecom, electronics, various other things, especially the civil service and then contracting.
Well, I definitely want to, want to cover where you separated non-honorable discharge from the Air Force.
Yeah, so I was separated in 2007, honorably. Got out. I had a choice of either staying in the Vegas area or going down to New Mexico for a job for a contract company for DOD. And from there, I chose to go down to New Mexico, worked at White Sands Staging Range, doing space surveillance equipment work over at Staging Range for the Air Force Space Communications, Air Force Space Command. And it was Attachment 1 for the GIODs out of Peterson Air Force Base.
So when you made, just physically, just because we talked about it, I've been there, but did your wife follow you there?
Yeah, we all agreed to go down there afterwards.
Where was housing?
In my case, I was living in Socorro, New Mexico itself. So Socorro is the county, and it's also Socorro is the main county seat for that area of New Mexico, central New Mexico. So we would sit there and also live in town there, or some would live in either Magdalena, Dowdle, or in San Antonio, New Mexico, right there down the street, basically from White Sands Range, for Stallion Range side of the house. So.
Did you enjoy that? Did you enjoy
It was interesting.
in New Mexico?
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I did that for a little bit. I was working for DCS ground stuff, worked with me and electronics stuff. So we had to make sure we're dual hatted for that contract. We had to sit there and know how to do electronics and how to fix things for the sensors and the communications that relate to that. And then also in the process, we also had to be a sensor operator during assigned shifts. Usually, like me in my case, I used to end up on a lot of the night shifts or midnight shifts, so we could do the observations. So we had to make sure we had to hit certain targets or in certain time frames to make sure that they could observe and see where they're moving deep in Earth orbit and stuff like that. So
Was that okay? So
that was from 2007 to 2010 for my case. During that time frame, I had a contract change over to a different company for that.
So you were contracting, but still continued to work
Yeah.
government-related
Correct.
positions.
Correct. Yeah, and then from 2010 to 2012, I transitioned over to being in Afghanistan. I was still working electronics, communication stuff. I was working for Marine Corps in Afghanistan, Helmand Province, doing counter RCID, counter remote controlled IED or radio controlled IED work. Working on that equipment for a major defense contractor for Marine Corps Systems Command. I was in Helmand Province mostly. We did flyaways within the province to a few other areas in Afghanistan as well for support the Marine Corps primarily. And that equipment made sure there was different types we utilized. It was man-mounted or man-pack mounted, so people on patrol could actually wear out their backpack and use it. There was also vehicle mounted. Primarily we used to do vehicle mounted stuff as well. So the vehicle mounted stuff was about a 50-pound piece of equipment, not on the back of the vehicle in certain areas depending on what the configuration was of the vehicle. And that was in charge of, or what that system was, a special system equipment to ensure that counter ICDs would go off to protect our military personnel. And that will look for certain things, for instance, for frequencies from key fobs to higher level cell phone frequencies, depending what they were, and it would be determined on a classified level of what those frequencies were. So.
Was that a constant? Like, did you
The
follow the
frequencies
Marines with? Were you had to move with them and with the equipment?
We had to go to outer fire bases and observation posts and COPs and stuff like that, kind of outpost bases on flyways to support their equipment to go fix it, whatever we needed to do. So we would go in convoys a lot of times. One of them, we knew the danger because also some of the contract were veterans or active guard and reserve as well. So we had that understanding of what danger we got ourselves into for agreeing to go on this contract and work it. Money was great, but we knew what the actual mission and cost was at the end of the day for what we were doing for the work we had to do. We were technically, by our schedule, it was supposed to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but of course, people have to rest somewhere between there. So our main office is over at Camp Leatherneck, and then in my case, I was stationed down at Camp Dwyer, Bob Dwyer, from 2010, 2012. So we would sit there and do a lot of flyaways. We had an airstrip out of Dwyer and an airstrip up at Leatherneck over at Camp Batch on the British side of the house. Fly out of there.
Can you explain a flyaway?
So a flyaway, what that means is that we sit there and go on certain various of the military aircraft, whether it be like an Osprey, a helicopter, back of a C-130, and get dropped off at the bases we need to go to, and then take care of the work we needed to take care of for the Marine Corps. Of course, there's been a couple times it was a little bit dicey going into the bases. Marshall, for instance, when I was there, just during the time of the surge. So there's a couple times where there was an incoming fire in that base and outgoing fire. during the day when I was working, and then there's also the same thing for incoming fire when I was trying to land at a different base for that. And then one of the convoys we had to do between different areas, or different bases that were close to each other. Master Sergeant in charge or Master Sergeant in charge of that unit or whatever that went with us, and helped fix during the base, the transition during convoys. Like about 5 minutes ago, we took away a large anti-tank mine before we went through the same route we're on now. So yeah, there's a couple of pucker moments. But most of us being vets, we also kind of had an unspoken agreement of if something does occur and we need to protect ourselves, just kind of hand us a weapon, even though we shouldn't do that in the first place being civilians. But it's just certain survivability. So.
Because you were going into remote areas.
Very remote areas, mostly Helmand Province, some other areas, but I know some people on that I work with, coworkers of mine, went to Sangin, which is a very high casualty loss area, especially during the surge for the Marines. Delmarone, a couple of the dams out near Kandahar.
Did you have a way, how when you're out in the field like that, because you are married, family, or even, how did you find a way of distraction, or what did you do?
You find a way of distraction. When we lucked out, we had commercial internet that we paid for ourselves, because we also needed it for work too, to relay certain information back to our company for Marine Corps for the contract needs. So we had that, we had internet, we had the normal PlayStation and stuff like that, but we had capability at main bases to actually have the internet to talk via internet, face to face. Had phone capability compared to when I was in from 2001 to 2007. It's a little bit different where I didn't have that internet cafe capability too much. I did have my own cell phone. I did have, areas on base where I could use a prepaid phone call or phone card to call back home, but it wasn't like, it was improved morale communications wise compared to the old letter days and just telephone calls.
Yeah. Did you keep up with news while you were there, or pretty much not?
To a certain point, you're kind of cut off to the news unless you talk to your families or look it up if you had the internet capability. But other than that, that was it. I was there during the time when they had that major. Actually, I think he was coming back or going out from leave when us over at Kuwait, over at Camp at Ali Osseline Air Base, and then Stars and Stripes was out there available still as well too. So that's the other way we kept up with news. But that's how I found out about, for instance, the Fukushima, tsunami information too. So.
Well, something was pretty intense where you were with what you were doing, but don't get a lot of.
Well, we had to figure out, for instance, we had to build. We had an agreement with per contractor, so Marine Corps supposed to provide us some shelter for living quarters, but some of us ended up not having that, so we had to take care of that our own selves. And in the case of Dwyer, we had a bunch of old shipping containers we built out, what they call hooches. It's a new thing these days, like a big thing for small housing. So we did that ourselves. They gave us that, and, power, and we had to do some trading. So for instance, to get the mattresses that we have for regular beds, we had to do some trading with the Seabees to get the mattresses we needed. So.
Just did what you had to do.
Exactly.
Found something to trade with. So that was.
Whether it be work or something physical. So.
That sounds good. Then, how did that go?
Well, end up with mattresses.
A little ingenuity there.
Exactly.
Did you have free time? I mean, in those conditions, for release, for either, was there something, because you were a contractor with the Marines, but still, was there a time to do sports or do anything to kind of just break the
There was the break
atmosphere,
at least on the main, FOBs, forward operating bases, main campsite or camp bases, big bases. there was that morale NWR stuff available.
Mm-hmm.
In our case, being with the Marines, they bring their workout equipment everywhere. So with the logistics engineering unit they were part of as far as the sector, we were allowed to sit there and go to their little mini gym and work out if we wanted to. There's a bigger one further down the way. They had some stuff from NWR equipment for workout stuff. So otherwise, yeah, just we would network within our little niche of a sector because we had our contract, another special unit or special equipment contracts as well for 3 other ones.
Mm-hmm.
They were all on the same lot, so we'd work together and do play PlayStation, video games, stuff like that. And when we had time to do so, we'd take downtime if we were too busy or whatever during the day, or if we had a major sandstorm come in, same thing. Because like there was times where we would sit there and work late at night, depending on what was going on for the units that needed to go out and come back to go support their missions. I think one point in time, at least during the day, we had like over 100 vehicles come in of a unit to get up and going. And that took us a good 12, 16 hours to get done.
You had to service those
Yes.
for the comms.
For the specialized equipment we had to utilize. So it was interesting. We had time to do so for downtime, but by contract, technically it says something else. It's just depending on what we had available at that point in time.
Sounds like, intense work, but good work.
Yeah. It was very rewarding work, especially for those of us that knew what the outcome would be. An example from feedback from Marines that came back to us, and I was like, yeah. So I was trying to relieve myself using the bathroom here at this berm, and right next to me was a RCID that didn't go off, luckily, because of that equipment that you're servicing and providing us.
Can it disable all of them in a radius, or is it?
Yeah, it can disable certain,
is it
depending on what
circular?
the frequency that's programmed in the classified information into the piece of equipment that they'll sit there and they'll just find it, it's actively looking for it. And once it finds it, whether it be forward, usually forward, or slightly to the right or the left of it. There wasn't a major, huge radius. But if it would disable at least the signals for it, it wouldn't disable the actual explosive. But
so can I assume that they made a point of when they did need to go relieve themselves that they went within a certain, stayed close to your equipment?
Yeah.
That sounds.
We would actually try to point it out, but of course, some Marines weren't listening until they figured out themselves that they should listen once they found out the hard way. So.
It's something very pragmatic, but
Yeah.
it's a good example. But because those are very low tech. I guess I don't think of that when you say with the fobs and a low frequency that just simple that the locals could rig up.
Yeah, the low tech stuff, and then still, of course, the high tech using cell phone still. Blocking those frequencies out, we utilize over there. It's a burner phone. And,
Where'd you go from there?
So from there, came back to New Mexico, got done with that contract. They tried to beg me to come back, which I did appreciate, don't get me wrong, but come to find out after I told them no, I started going to school for my bachelor's in electrical engineering, but that changed later on. I found out that there was 2 major attacks on the base that I would have been at. First one was they actually got past the first perimeter gate, perimeter fence area boundary. And then the second one was actually a major attack on the airfield, which I flew out of many times, as well as the rest of us. Lost multiple Marines out of the Marine Air Wing Field Station at that point in time. So that kind of messed me a little bit, obviously. But yeah, there's that. But at that time, still went to school. Lucked out during school at New Mexico Tech. Got a co-op job, internship opportunity. Working at the National Radio Astronomy at the Very Large Array over in New Mexico. Doing the RF protection group and RF group. and learning how to be an associate engineer and how to do that stuff for electrical engineering stuff. So during that, did that for about 6 months from January 2014 to June of 2014. Continuing on, actually got a regular full-time job with them underneath fiber optic stuff, and then eventually the servo side of that as well, because it was the same shop group but separate sides of the house. While I was actually being an associate engineer for the co-op, I ended up building an amplification circuit for the visitor center to show what conversion can do from radio frequency from random just sources like the sun, because it's a solar observatory telescope using an old X-band feed horn off of one of the antennas, and it shows, okay, if we point at this source of RF, it'll sit there and go peg out to this amount of voltage when it gets converted out on the analog meter.
Were you familiar with the Very Large Array before you
I
were
was
stationed?
familiar because I was living in Mexico before, and I changed over to the Afghanistan contract, and I still lived there at that point in time. So I was aware. I did try to get on with them for that, but the only way apparently I guess I could get on is doing the co-op, luckily. So I did that, and then after that, 2017 is when I transitioned over to here in Georgia. I've been here before, obviously, from being in tech school, and then coming back here one time for another special training while I was stationed at Hickam Air Force Base. But 2017, moved here. Currently, I'm civil service with Department of Justice, working at the federal prison here in Atlanta, doing communications stuff. Their security, electronics, and comms. I'm currently, that's what I do.
You staying involved with veterans or organizations?
I stay very involved with veterans. Of course, I'm a lifetime member of VFW, DAV. Advocate, help them do. I used to be a service officer back in Mexico at the post. I volunteered for VFW. As far as my membership with VFW, I started after I got back stationed at Hickam from Korea. They had a program called Military Assistance Program, and they would just join for a year for free. But I went from there. But yeah, I currently help everybody get their stuff they need as prior service officer. My last major position within the post locally here in Henry County area was me being the junior vice commander. So I used to help command staff and leadership try to run the post and guide and steer where we needed to go and do certain projects.
What is the range of vets that you seem to be working with? Are we getting any of or do you get members from recently, these last?
We get a range of members from most current conflicts of Afghanistan, Iraq, all the way back to even Vietnam era. We actually a couple other posts around here locally that I know of. We have a couple of World War II and Korea vets still around, but of course it's getting far and few between. Due to age and just life moving on. And then that's that one. Of course, Syria for Operation Inherent Resolve, continuation in Afghanistan, various other things. Currently, also too, with my work, I have collateral duty. Deal with the affirmative employment program, affirmative action that ensures that veterans that get hired or are already on staff, as well as current active guard and reserves personnel, get the help they need, guide them where they need from certain resources, depending on what they want or need to get, how they need to do for the benefits, and how certain things on the other side of the house for civil service, for their employment and reasonable accommodations need to be taken care of, and how to file for it.
When veterans, because it's a big thing, they talk about hiring veterans, veteran employment. Does the employer benefit from? Do they get any funding for hiring vets or for providing services, or if there's special services specifically for a veteran? Do the employers contribute to it, or is it?
I don't know how it works on the true federal government side of the house, but I know for certain companies do get certain tax breaks, depending on the state and the federal requirements in that state and so on and so forth, for their corporate taxes for hiring that veteran. Whether it's just either, and it depends if you're classified as a veteran only or a disabled veteran, or other categories of being, 100% disabled or Gold Star spouse or surviving 100% disabled spouse for the veteran that they were married to. So that depends on that. But the federal government side of the house, the benefits of that, so you have preferred hiring preference. You can, depending on the career field that you were in, and if you still stay in the same career field and qualify for the position, for the requisition put out by the various agencies and departments of the U.S. government, you can get hired on as up to GS11, which is a pretty decent pay scale, depending where you're at. You get all the federal benefits for insurance, stuff of that nature, healthcare. I mean, it's very good benefits, shall I say. In my case, it does supplemental the VA benefits that I do have, and the VA benefits supplements it for healthcare at least. I don't have to pay for any of my healthcare because I'm rated a certain point for the VA, but for my family, it's pretty much reduced the amount of costs that I've had to pay for that. Like recently, I had a daughter of mine had to take care of some surgery, and the amount we have to pay is only like $1,000 out of like a $15,000 surgery.
So it helps.
That does help
benefit.
for the benefits. Federal government benefits are pretty great. You can transfer anywhere. Once you get in the federal government, you're not stuck with one agency. If it's not for you. You can transfer anywhere you want as long as you qualify and get past the point where they hire you on. Veterans preference is there. So depending again, if you're just a veteran, you only get like a 5-point hiring preference, which is adds to, they kind of break it down to scores. Depending on what your qualifications are on your resume, you get a certain amount point score, 5 points extra on top of that, which is straight veteran, 10 points if you're disabled, or also either a Gold Star spouse or 100% disabled spouse trying to get hired on for that. So you get those preferences. Some of those preferences are also available within the states, well, city and county, depending on where you're trying to work for governments and that nature. So if you're trying to work for a local police force and a firefighter, they may have those preferences available as well for veterans.
Do you find, since you work around do you find current veterans or recent veterans or that are transitioning from military into civilian life? I don't know if do you come in contact with some that aren't really aware of what's available to them?
A lot.
A lot.
Because the information really isn't put out there heavily.
Okay.
And it's pretty much kind of like, in a way, to a certain point, still word of mouth. Because of course legislation changes all the time. But those that don't know can't put that information out and also learn that information. So that's where, for instance, like certain veteran service organizations, VSOs, fill in the gaps. Because we are, veterans advocating for our own community and our own military community as well. To sit there and put that information out to say, hey, we need to change this, or this is what we got. Here's the information you have and you need, so you can continue on with that transition. Because we understand that that can be hard, depending on what, for instance, things that occur for the invisible wounds of war, from PTSD, other disabilities that you may have from orthopedic and so on and so forth. Because you have to explain, okay, yeah, this is how you file for things. This is where you need to go. Because there's actually a lot of red tape, especially with the VA system, to get some of those benefits.
So you advocate for the existing vets?
Yes.
And so it's also changing, or when you say...
So certain things changing as far as legislation, I go back to that. Like for instance, right now the PACT Act deals with trying to provide better care for those that are affected by the burn pits, major toxic exposures that the military has caused. Because like in Afghanistan and Iraq and most of the Middle Eastern theaters of operation for conflict combat operations, they use burn pits a lot just to burn massive amounts of trash, whether it be human remains, medical, chemical. It would be all in the same area, and that's why they call it the new Agent Orange, at least for the post 9/11 generation.
So there could be some vets that were denied like years past that aren't even aware that maybe now they
that, or they've been denied because there isn't that legislation in current law for the VA to actually utilize and assign benefits to for their disability rating.
Do you think it helps for civilians to be aware of the needs for the veterans? I mean, as far as the support or to help if they need. There needs to be additional funding. I mean, these are veterans fought for, they served our military and now they're out in civilian life. But
there's a lot of disconnect because I mean as they say, there's only the 1%, but nowadays more and more. It's more like the 0.5% of the population of the United States. We are mostly an all voluntary military, compared to the rest of the nations in the world that have major militaries. Like Korea, for instance, they're required for their citizens are required to actually do a 3-year term of service, bare minimum, because of the way everything's written out. Because of North Korea and South Korea in the war back in the day, but United States military, there's really a major disconnect, and it's getting more and more. Especially with, like, for instance, there used to be a lot more veterans in the military within congressional seats, and now it's getting way less and less and less than those that have more affluent backgrounds, shall we say, are probably more in that seat than anything else, or even those that may have veterans as their family members. It's getting less and less as well because of the turmoil that's going on. Currently, they don't want to be in there anymore to advocate. I know the ones that do want to advocate are very few and far between. Like the PACT Act's only passed because advocation between those that serve on the committees for military and veterans, both on the House and the Senate, but also like major known celebrities of like Jon Stewart and John Fife have advocated for those during the 9/11 attacks for New York and that for the after effects from firefighters, so on and so forth, from the debris and chemicals and stuff that was burning, for their medical stuff, have come back and advocated for the military side of the house.
Yes, I
hear. But, yeah, civilian-wise, civilians should know what's going on as well, because at least to me, that if we sign that blank check, there's no appreciation there. Why sign the blank check? Why continue the service? Why continue to advocate for it? We need the defense of the nation, but it's hard to do when the appreciation goes away or the reasoning behind it goes away.
Well, it's a huge part of why it's important that you've taken the time to share your experiences with me, and even I think people are beginning to slowly but surely, even the children and family members not understanding what their parents are doing, so there's a need, vehicles, even the training when at the United Military Care Fair where we met, the young Marines that were there, but some of them get, there's mentoring going on, and it's kind of a pride, but also learning a little bit, because there are young people considering going into the military that aren't really aware. They don't get to hear. They're not talking to people. They don't have their neighbors. It's not like it used to be. When you lived in a community, like I grew up with. But at the same time, explaining, because no matter what your service, 24/7 there's military right now. There's operations going on. There's surveillance. There's all kinds of things to keep our security around the world. That we're not. Somebody's doing it, but we're not aware of. A lot of civilians aren't aware, and like you said, you signed that line for serving, and went and did whatever needed to be done, and then you come back, and it's why I'm doing this is just to show appreciation and honoring the vets, but also giving a voice so people can hear, that to understand what all's going on, and people that are just around you. You just be surprised, because you don't have these conversations at the barbecue or at the high school events. You don't sit down and talk about it, but it is important, and I think that it's hard to digest everything, but it comes through with the stories, and I think what's evident is all the involvement you have now with vets, because you can relate on so many levels, and to stay involved with the organizations. And you want to mention the other one that you're working with?
So the other one I currently work with a lot is Emerging Vets and Players. So with them, it's a organization that was founded together between Nate Boyer and Jay Glazer. Nate himself is a military, but also an NFL player. But it gets combat vets and former pro athletes like from NFL, Major League Baseball, various other things together. We have a little group huddle session that's confidential. After we have a little sweat equity, so we have a mixture between circuit and MMA workout type deal. Get together, have that. We don't push each other too hard as far as the workout side. We try to understand that all of us have some disabilities of some sort potentially or injuries. So we try to work with that and have workarounds depending on what moves we're doing, so on and so forth. Like there's 11 chapters right now. It's trying to slowly but surely grow.
So where did it start?
Right now,
Where's it based?
The base is out of in LA, as far as the headquarters, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
The rest of it, otherwise, so you have a chapter in LA, chapter in Vegas, Seattle now, here in Atlanta, up in New York, and there's one in Dallas now. The one here in Atlanta was helped started and funded primarily by the Home Depot Foundation, Arthur Blank Foundation, through Miss Angie Blank, through her connections, as well as when Coach Quinn was still part of the Falcons, he himself put some personal money up. And there's also one other NFL player that was a captain for the Air Force, National Guard too. He put some stuff. Ben, I forget his last name, but he's now I think currently with the Broncos, but he was with the Falcons. He put some personal funds up as well as some award funds for being an outstanding community support person from the NFL. So.
That is for veterans. It's not for civilians.
No, it's
other than to support it, I guess.
Yeah, it's for that.
Possibly.
There is for that. You can still support either way. I mean, at the end of the day, what this does is like it does help with the disconnect. For instance, if we take the uniform off, whether it be combat vets or former NFL or former pro players or pro athletes, you have that identification for a while because it's been told us what your identification is, and then once you separate that identification from what you're used to doing. A lot of people get lost from that. That's what may create, those trigger points of, PTSD, major anxiety, so on and so forth, because they don't know what to do from that point on. And this kind of fills in that gap to help the mental health side of the house of that too. The organization does have some internal resources for helping mental health too. So.
Do you find yourself in a mentor role at all, based on your experience?
It's like a member mentor role, shall we say? Every one of us is a member, but everyone else can mentor each other. It's a peer-to-peer support group is what it ends up being at the end of the day, as far as on the base level, if you look at it like that. So there's that, and it helps. Like a lot of the veterans, with the VA system being the way it is. There's been a few veterans kind of gone to MVP instead and use that as their therapy instead of actually going to their assigned, psychologist or social worker because of what happened to them during their interactions or what happened because they needed to call the emergency suicide line. There's been stories of that nature. I got called the suicide line and I got locked up and they really didn't want to help me. So there's that.
So a vet helping a vet. Okay. They can relate with each other.
Helping a vet helping a former pro athlete. As recently, we have at least 2 pro athletes that are from the NFL that work with us. They're part of our membership now. We're just getting one recently. He's actually going to school here at Emory now for becoming an orthopedic surgeon. So he's trying to understand that side of the house and the dichotomy too. Now that he works with us and he's trying to find a new group that kind of we're related to.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't. Really...
Yeah. Our MVP, they are heavily supported and promoted by the NFL Players Retirement Association as well. We're trying to get more connections as far as that goes. Locally, we deal with a lot with the Atlanta Braves, the Falcons. There's also a chapter in Chicago too. So recently, like for instance, Chicago, they had a major workout session over at the gym for the Chicago Bears.
Okay. So the with your MVP organization, the professional players, the athletes can help also use what their past was to bring attention and advocate for the veterans or just for PTSD or mental health.
Yeah, because there's, for instance, they have, at that point in time, you get a new contract you sign for, $5 million, and all of a sudden you're, making $2 at, Burger King, for instance. There's that. You have that change of mentality where they go from zero to, multi-million-dollar contracts that they don't know how to handle that, and that does mess with your psychology as well. So that they kind of learn how to work together. Yeah.
That sounds like it'd be a whole interview just to talk about the MVP, or just even vets helping vets.
Yeah.
You can take every organization. If is there anyone's name or shout out or anything you want to mention that you haven't touched on through about your military career, or that's kind of influenced the direction you've gone, or?
So the reason why I do a lot of advocating is because of how much family members have served and how linked the service of the family has been, from multiple different angles and sides and so on and so forth. Like for instance, at my side, I've got a lot of branches that somehow, some way have military service in it, one way or the other. My wife, for instance, her side has been mostly Navy with some Marine Corps influences and a little Army, of that nature. And so it goes back, and that's the reason why I do the advocation that I do and care, because I've been there, done that, obviously, for lack of terms.
Sounds like it's in your DNA.
Unfortunately, it's in the DNA somewhat. I don't want to say unfortunately, but fortunately, but unfortunately, depending on how you do it.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to give the kids a break right now. Just like, if you want to, go for it, but I'm not going to push you.
Unless I've missed something, just final, again, talking about kids and civilians, what would you tell a young you or a young person considering any branch of service? You chose Air Force. Is there, I don't know if for you it was just a direct, easy, you were good in comms, but what's something you would tell maybe a high school senior or somebody, male or female? I assume now that you've worked with both.
I've worked with both my entire time.
Okay, I was starting to ask you that, but
yeah. As far as that's concerned, so like in my case, I did have a choice. I was about ready to graduate high school. I kind of knew what I wanted to do, but not fully. And I did have a scholarship from the state of Nevada to go to one of the in-state colleges, but it was either I didn't know what I fully want to do. I kind of had an idea. I want to try to do electronics, not really the IT side of the house, but nothing was available within state. And I knew if I didn't do that, I didn't have a really full direction, I would pretty much just squander it as far as the scholarship goes. So I just chose to figure out, okay, this is my score, this is what I can do. This would force me to get out of the middle of nowhere. And it opened up a lot of other doors, opportunity-wise, networking and various other things. I wouldn't have the decently, actually over-decently paying job, shall I say, right now that I have if I didn't do what I did, considering. So. And going the Air Force route, it was more because I listened to others that had been there. But in my case, learning for otherwise, the treatment versus some other branches like Army and Marine Corps is definitely a lot nicer for quality of life, if you want that kind of thing. Because we send our officers out to do most of the battle versus others, so we kind of get to reap the benefits from doing so. The Air Force in general has to usually use their mind more than probably some other branches. Of course, Space Force came out of us and some other space assets from other branches. So, as far as lineage goes for military service branches, it was the Army, Air Corps, now Air Force, and then now Space Force. But I can see the reason behind their mission as well, considering what I've done in my past. Overall, I wouldn't be where I was pretty much if I didn't do what I did.
You've been fortunate too. I'm glad you got out of some.
I've lucked out.
You've lucked out of some situations, so it sounds like
it's also learning how to apply yourself. If you just sit there and don't know where to go and don't try to ask within your own network, whether it be your old military buddy that got out.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know where to go to get your benefits. You have to figure it out. And it's just unfortunate there's a lot of gaps there between then and now. I mean, luckily there's more push for transition classes compared to like back in the 80s and 60s and 70s, where it's just, here's your 214 and goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
So that creates a lot of other issues, of course, that are well known between the VA and other VSOs. So.
Yeah, so it's also thanks to a lot of the older vets that what they've been through is turned around.
Exactly.
Trying to do it a little bit better.
The current benefits that we have now would be, even back in the Vietnam era, for instance, the benefits they didn't have then wouldn't be there unless someone would advocate for it that is within the community that understands it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times it usually takes those within the community, so veterans and military that know what they're doing.
That's a good point. That that you get out and kind of like what you're doing now. You know how to be helping. But anyway, well, if there isn't anything else, I just thank you, Greg, for all of this, and thanks for the service, and that you continue. Like many vets, it seems like they get out and vets help each other. But on the other hand, I think there's a lot of supporters of veterans, which was why that event was so fulfilling, was to be there, that everybody had a real commitment, and I think it raised awareness. So hopefully maybe we'll be better, and I hope to learn more. This isn't a final thing, it's a one-time thing, and your story will be recorded. So just thanks a lot. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Sue.
Appreciated it.